In India, I find that very little time is given to planning and engineering. Most of the projects are required to be completed in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. So this is where, the engineering takes a hit. Day by day, the standards of ethics are falling. I have spent years in industrial construction. I had experience in industrial structures, bridges, roads, then even nuclear power plants.
Let's talk about the future of construction.
I think the future is bright. Youngsters who don't know anything about construction, they apply for jobs with consultants. So when I interview them, I always tell them, first you work with a contracting company. If they undertake this course, this would definitely broaden their vision and they would be familiar as to how projects are undertaken, how they are executed, how they are supervised.
What advice would you give to someone who is starting with civil engineering and construction management? To start us off, could you briefly introduce yourself and share a bit about your early career in civil engineering?
I did most of my schooling in Delhi.
So you born and brought up in Delhi?
No, I was born in Pune, and in standard 2, my father got transferred there. So I did my entire schooling in Delhi. So after which in 71, I came to Baroda, where I joined the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Engineering, civil engineering course. I completed my graduation in 1976. So after that, between 76 to 83, I was working with pre-stressing companies and contractors on bridge projects. During this period, I also went to Iraq, worked with Afghans there on railway bridges. So it was after coming back, I joined Stoop Consultants. I had a long innings with them, off and on, I think 4 stints I did with Stoop. I was there with them for a period of 17 years. If you look at if I am to categorize my career, I have spent about 7 years in industrial construction. I was with Special Steels for a while. 5 years I was with them, and 2 years I was with Indorama in Indonesia. Then about 9 years with contractors, or including pre-stressing companies, which was my first job, the Freyssinet pre-stressed concrete company. After that, after returning from Indonesia in 1997, I again joined Stoop Consultants. And at that time, the planning and engineering of the Mumbai-Pune Expressway was in progress. So that opened an opportunity for me. I was posted, I was tasked with the coordination and field activities and including supervision. So that was a very good exposure. I was associated in the drafting of the tender documents of that, evaluation of bids, and then finally at site for construction supervision. So this was, I would say, my first major road project, and this was a trendsetter in the sense that this was the first project on which rigid pavement was used on a very large scale. So the main consideration was, it has a low maintenance cost over its entire life.
Could you walk us through some of the most significant projects you have worked on across your career? Any that stand out as particularly memorable or challenging?
So it was after 1997 that I really got involved in infrastructure sector. So after Mumbai Pune, I got involved as a team leader on the Satara Kagal road project. And then I also had a stint with Ideal Road Builders So I was handling projects as a project coordinator, to NHAI projects. And then I went to Ethiopia in 2007. I was working with WSP IMC, which is a British company, consulting company. So that was my first overseas stint in Africa. The first being in Iraq. I was there between 81 to 83. So after that, of course, there was Indonesia as well. So, but in Africa, this was my first experience, and uh, it was a huge learning curve for me. The contractor was Chinese. It's a different ball game. You need to understand their psychology, the way they think, and the biggest challenge is the language barrier. So even the project managers need not or do not necessarily know English, so they have got a translator. So there is always a communication gap. So one is never sure whether what we are putting across is understood, and vice versa. As it is in most of the African countries, you need to have a local partner. So our local partner at that time was a company by the name AEC. So the support staff, including our the assistant president engineer, they were from the local company. So that also posed a challenge because one needs to understand the local cultures, the way they work. So apart from these, human relations, the project itself posed huge challenges. This project was located in Benishangul region, which is one of the most neglected regions in Ethiopia, at least at that time. And the border with Sudan was very close. So it was, a kind of no man's land. We were having a camp, and that was the only settlement in that area. Uh, if you had to, fetch vegetables, you had to go to 200 kilometers. The nearest village was also a hospital. That was about 175 kilometers. And Addis Ababa, which is the country capital of Ethiopia, that was 700 and odd kilometers. And the project itself was located about 1700 kilometers from Djibouti, which was the nearest port. So all the Chinese, construction materials, steelworks and all that, they would land there, and then they had to be transported. So that was a big challenge. And secondly, the project had this. The entire project was from a place called Asosa to Guba. So which is on either side of the Blue Nile River. And at that time, the distance was about 1,000 kilometers between these 2 points. There was a big detour one had to take because there was no bridge there. So this project would result in a distance saving of about 1,000 kilometers. So that was the importance of the project. So the contractor, the steel truss, it had a steel truss, the Blue Nile Bridge, it had a steel truss which was fabricated in China. And then the components were shipped to Djibouti, transported to the site. There was no access road, so the contractor had to bulldoze through forests, say about 75 kilometers. So those were the challenges. Then the bridge itself posed a lot of technical challenge. It was very interesting. It was a truss type of bridge, and as per the original design, the designers were from Carl Bro from Denmark. And there was a big gap, almost about 10 years between the time that the detailed engineering was done and when the project was implemented. So they had specified rolled sections for the main members of the truss. Now, when the Chinese came, they proposed welded sections, which are built-up sections, which involves lot of welding. And I was really skeptical about the welding distortions that normally take place when you fabricate built up sections. So, but they were confident. And I had occasion to visit China twice. So we saw the rolling mill from where they were planning to procure the structural steel. Then we had a look at the fabrication facility, which was a very elaborate fabrication facility. And when we inspected that premises, their facilities, my doubts were set to rest. When the components were shipped to Ethiopia and assembled at site, the fabrication was so precise. I mean, none of the bolt holes, there was no mismatch with the bolts, between the bolts and bolt holes. I mean, the flame, the gas cutter was not used at all on that project for any other structural members, main members, which was really, I mean, very, very impressive. Then there was one more problem. You see, the fabrication was in China and the project, all of us were in Ethiopia. So there was a need to mobilize an independent testing agency who would be carrying out the day-to-day supervision of the fabrication and painting. So there was a provisional sum which was given in the contract, which was provided for in the contract. So we operated that, and concurrence was taken from the client who agreed. And we mobilized SGS China to do the day-to-day supervision, and including painting, which was at that particular time was carried out under sub-zero temperatures. So they did a very nice job, and the product which we finally got at site was very nice.
What initially drew you to the construction and infrastructure industry?
To be honest, I mean, when one passes out of the college, he has vague ideas about the industry as such. So he is not, or one cannot be choosy that, okay, I want this particular job in this particular sector. So since my elective in my engineering, final year engineering was pre-stressed concrete, I sought an opportunity with Freyssinet pre-stressed concrete company. So I worked there for 3 years, and that's how it gave me the exposure to pre-stressed concrete, bridge works. So that was the starting point. So after that, I did some small bridge works, one in Pune, Chembur flyover. And then I got an opportunity to go to Iraq. So at that time, the war was on between Iran and Iraq. 81, I went there. So we had 3 railway bridges there. So so that's how it started. So I got more and more involved into pre-stressed concrete bridges, pre-tension and post-tension. I got an good experience in Iraq. Yeah.
What is the one thing that civil and construction industry lacks despite the evolving technologies? What is your point of view in the vacuum present in AEC workforce?
One of the most important things which is lacking is the ethics. Day by day, the standards of ethics are falling. So I would say that that's a very important reason. Another thing is, in India, I find that, in my opinion, very little time is given to planning and engineering. You see, most of the projects are required to be completed in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, which is not always consistent with the magnitude of the project. So this is where, the engineering takes a hit. So due thought process is not possible. And somewhere, there are gaps and errors which creep up. This gives rise to variations, claims, and some funny situations. Like recently, about 6 months ago, at Andheri, I believe it was Gokhale Bridge, where there was a meter gap between the new bridge and the existing bridge. So I would say that probably, this is a result of that. So this is one major problem. And in contrast, I have found that overseas in foreign countries, they give time for detailed engineering, and then they take comparatively less time in actual execution of the project. Here it is just the other way around. In our country, detailed engineering is done in a jiffy, and then we spend a lot of time in the actual execution of the project. Because you get surprised, oh, this is missed out, so something is incorrect. So that is one major issue according to me.
What advice would you give to young engineers aiming to grow into construction project management roles on large and small scale projects?
Nowadays, it's the era of IT. So everybody wants to, as soon as uh, engineers pass out of the college, they expect a air conditioned room, and they have some different idea, and the very idea of sweating it out on the field, it is very discouraging for them. So this is a, not a correct approach. Youngsters should not shirk from sweating it out in the field. They should maximize, they should try to learn whatever things they can, and they should develop an eye for detail. Don't just skim on the surface, go deeper. I think that is when your vision gets broadened, your thought process becomes correct.
What role do you believe project management plays?
Project management plays a very important role in the construction industry. You see, the project proponent or the employers, they rarely have an entire dedicated team to supervise the actual project construction. So while the best that they can do is, okay, they can appoint consultants who are fully equipped, and they have the personnel, trained personnel to supervise the project. So nowadays, almost a universal trend is all mega projects, the client will invite bids for design as well as supervision. So the client will specify the key staff, he will stipulate the qualifications and experience, as well as the key support staff. Project management or construction supervision, these are two interchangeable words with a very fine difference between them. Construction supervision, these consultants are purely responsible only for the supervision part. They are not responsible for the project management as such. To give you an instance, okay, let's say if it is an industrial plant, if it is a steel making plant which is being set up, so here there would be a project manager who would probably from the main discipline of engineering, and under him there will be different, there might be a construction supervision company, and then he manages. So the project manager and the construction manager, if they don't appoint a consultant, there could be a single person who is responsible for the construction, and this person is generally designated as the construction manager. So that's the difference.
You mentioned overseas they spend a lot of time in planning and they make the execution quicker. It's the other way around here.
So, in the detailed project report, first you have to, assuming that the planning is already done, the decision is already taken to construct a road between point A to point B. Then in the detailed engineering, there are traffic counts which are involved, which would, decide the configuration of the road. whether it is going to be a 4-lane road or a 6-lane road. Traffic projections are there. Field investigations, these are the most important things. The topographic survey, field investigations for the road as well as the bridges. So, this could make or break the project. If the field investigations are accurate, you do not get last minute surprises, or surprises are, restricted to a minimum. So all these issues, all this process, it takes time, based on the field investigations. Then you carry out detailed designs. And there is, of course, the client interaction, his approvals, his comments, everything is, involved in the whole process. So unless importance is given to the detailed engineering, one can expect a poor quality of DPR, as we call it. I'll tell you, these gaps which I was talking about. In Ethiopia, I mentioned to you about this SGS, the independent testing agency being mobilized. Another thing, what I realized when we set out the bridge alignment and marked the founding levels at the abutments. Abutment is the last structure at the bank of the river. So what we found, it was soft soil, and when I put the level, the proposed founding level, it was just about 1 meter or 1.5 meters from the soil, and it was resting on soil. So this I flagged it up very, very early, in the project. So this was pointed out to the client, and who was very receptive about it. He agreed that yes, it involves a redesign. So we, the consultants, we redesigned the abutment, and since it was picked up very, very early at the right stage, there was no delay because of redesign. So this is where a very experienced resident engineer, on behalf of supervision consultants, they play a very important role. The contractor did not realize. The client is, the project area is so remote that even the client had not visited the site for quite some time. So project management does play a very important role.